Welcome to Fragile Bonds, to the powerful stories of family, love, loss, and the choices that shape our lives. Now let's begin today's story.
In a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago, there stood a white single-family home where Melissa and Brian lived. A small flower bed sat by the front entrance, bursting with colorful tulips each spring. On a cold March morning, Melissa Carter was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, listening to her daughter's laughter drifting in from the living room. Chloe had just turned 5. With her brown hair tied in 2 pigtails, she was a girl who never stopped smiling. This morning, she sat on the sofa talking to her 3-month-old baby brother, Ethan. Though Ethan couldn't yet hold his head up completely, he moved his tiny mouth in response to his sister's voice. Melissa was a freelance marketing consultant. After graduating from college, she'd worked at an advertising agency, but when Chloe was born, she decided to go independent. Now she worked from home with several clients, managing her workload at her own pace. At least, that was the plan. In reality, juggling a baby and work was far more exhausting than she'd imagined. Ethan woke crying multiple times each night, leaving Melissa chronically sleep-deprived. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Her husband Brian appeared. He was an engineer at an IT company, and lately he'd been working remotely more often. Tall and wearing black-rimmed glasses, he was already carrying his laptop under his arm first thing in the morning. "Morning," Brian said as he headed toward the coffee maker. "Morning. Working from home today?" Melissa asked. "No, I'm going into the office. I have meetings this afternoon." Melissa felt a twinge of disappointment. She had 2 online client meetings scheduled for today. Trying to manage conference calls while taking care of Ethan always left her on edge. But she said nothing. She knew that even if she asked Brian for help, all she'd get were words like, "That sounds tough," and nothing more. On the surface, the Carter family seemed happy. A spacious living room, a well-maintained yard, adorable children. To the neighbors, they must have looked like the ideal family. But there were cracks only Melissa could see. The most obvious was how little they talked anymore. They used to discuss everything, but now they only exchanged the bare minimum. "Daddy, are you coming home early today?" Chloe asked. "We'll see. Depends on work," Brian answered, patting his daughter's head. Melissa watched her husband's back as she cooked bacon in the frying pan. Lately, Brian had been checking his phone constantly. During meals, while watching TV, his eyes were always on that screen. "Who's texting you?" Melissa would ask, and Brian would always reply, "Just work," immediately turning the phone face down. At first, she didn't think much of it. IT engineers got a lot of messages, that was normal. But gradually, something began to feel off. The expression on Brian's face when he checked his messages didn't match someone reading work emails. It was something more private, more secretive. Still, Melissa didn't press him. Exhausted from childcare and work, she had no energy left to confront marital problems. She told herself, "He's just busy with work," and let the days go by. One Tuesday morning, Brian said something unusual. "I'm working from home today, so I'll watch the baby." Melissa looked at her husband in surprise. "Really?" "Yeah. Drop Chloe at school and take your time. I don't have any meetings today, just coding work." Melissa felt a small surge of joy. Finally, her husband was offering to help. After all those times she'd wanted to say, "I need more help," but couldn't, it felt like those unspoken words were finally taking shape. That would really help. "Thank you." After breakfast, Melissa began getting Chloe ready for school. She packed a water bottle and lunch box into the small pink backpack, then combed and arranged Chloe's hair. It was their usual morning routine. In the living room, Brian stood by the window holding Ethan. The baby was quiet in his father's arms. Brian's expression seemed calm, but somehow distant. Like he was thinking about something else, staring off into space. "Chloe, time to go," Melissa called from the front door. Chloe climbed down from the sofa but didn't move right away. She stared at her father and baby brother with a look that suggested she wanted to say something. Her small eyebrows drew together slightly, and she bit her lip. "What's wrong, Chloe?" Melissa noticed her daughter's odd behavior. "Nothing," Chloe answered in a small voice. "Hurry up or we'll be late." Melissa took her daughter's hand and headed toward the door. Chloe turned back once to look at her father. Brian didn't notice his daughter, still gazing down at Ethan. On his profile was a complex emotion that even Melissa hadn't noticed. Car keys in hand, Melissa opened the door. The cold March air hit her face. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. Melissa started walking toward the car, but Chloe wasn't following. When she turned around, her daughter was still standing on the front steps. "Chloe, what's the matter?" Chloe looked up at her mother with an anxious expression. In her eyes was something too serious for a 5-year-old. Melissa grew concerned and went back to her daughter. "Does your tummy hurt? Or don't you want to go to school?" Chloe shook her head. She tried to say something in a small voice, but the words wouldn't come. Melissa knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Is something worrying you? You can tell Mommy." Chloe hesitantly opened her mouth. "Mommy." "What?" "Nothing." Chloe suddenly swallowed her words. "Let's go to school." Melissa felt confused, but when she checked the time, they were running late. "Okay. Let's go then." They started walking toward the car. Melissa opened the driver's side door, and Chloe was about to climb into her child's seat in the back, that very moment. "Mommy, wait." Chloe's voice was urgent. Melissa spun around in surprise. Her daughter stood frozen, hand on the car door. "What is it, Chloe?" Chloe stared at her mother, her lips trembling. Tears welled in her eyes. Melissa rushed to her daughter's side. "Chloe, what happened? Tell me." Chloe took a deep breath and said in a small voice, "Daddy, yesterday, he was on a weird phone call." Melissa's heart seemed to stop for a moment. But she quickly regained her composure. "A work call, right? Daddy's always on the phone." "No," Chloe shook her head. "It was different." Melissa placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Different how?" Chloe looked up at the sky as if searching for words. It's hard for a 5-year-old to articulate the strangeness of the adult world. Still, she tried her best to explain. Daddy's voice was small. Not loud like usual. He was talking secretly. Secretly? Yeah. He thought I was asleep. But I woke up because I wanted water. Melissa felt something cold in her chest. But she tried not to take it too seriously yet. So what was he saying? Chloe stared straight into her mother's eyes. Those eyes were completely earnest. He said, "Today's the chance." Melissa's breathing stopped. "Today's the chance." Yeah. He said it over and over. "Today's the chance. It's only today." Melissa desperately tried to stay calm. It must be about a work project. Some deadline, and he was stressed about it. That's what she told herself. "Chloe, that's probably about work. Daddy has an important project." But Chloe didn't look convinced. She squeezed her mother's hand. That small hand was cold and trembling. "But Mommy." "What?" Chloe's next words shook Melissa's world. Daddy was looking at the baby and saying, "I'm sorry." Melissa gasped. Her heart began pounding violently. "I'm sorry." To Ethan. Chloe nodded slightly. Yeah. He was on the phone outside the baby's room, and after he hung up, he went in, and while looking at the baby, he said, "I'm sorry." Various thoughts began swirling in Melissa's mind. Today's the chance. I'm sorry. Working from home. Watching the baby. These words connected, forming a terrifying hypothesis. Chloe, when was this? Last night? Yeah. Really late. When I looked at the clock, it was past 9. 9 o'clock. Melissa thought back to last night. She'd been exhausted and went to bed before 10. Brian had said he was still in the living room. He had work to do. Did you hear anything else? Chloe thought hard. Daddy also said, everything's ready. And then. Never coming back. Melissa stood up. Her knees were shaking. Never coming back. The meaning of those words was clear. Brian was planning something. And it would happen today. Chloe, get back in the car. Mommy will be right back. Mommy, where are you going? Melissa looked at her daughter's anxious face and answered in as calm a voice as she could manage. I just forgot something. I'll be right back. But inside, Melissa was in turmoil. As she ran toward the front door, she imagined the worst scenario. Brian was trying to run away with Ethan. Why? Where? With whom? Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. She took a deep breath and opened the door. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Brian? No answer. Melissa entered the living room. No one was there. The sofa still bore the impression where Brian had been sitting. But neither her husband nor the baby were anywhere to be seen. Brian! Melissa shouted up toward the second floor. But there was no response. She ran up the stairs and burst into Ethan's room. The crib was empty. Panic seized her. Melissa checked the other rooms one by one. The bedroom, the study, the bathroom. Brian and Ethan were nowhere. Then she heard a faint engine sound. From outside. Melissa rushed to the window. The sound was coming from the direction of the garage. She ran down the stairs and went out the back door. The moment she opened the garage door, Melissa was struck speechless by the scene before her. Brian was trying to put Ethan in the back seat of the car. The child's seat was already installed, and the baby was quiet in his father's arms. And the car trunk was open, with 2 large suitcases already loaded inside. Melissa's brain understood the situation instantly. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a planned escape. Brian! Melissa's scream echoed through the garage. Brian spun around in surprise. On his face was an expression mixing guilt and panic. Melissa! Why are you? Brian was clearly flustered. I thought you took Chloe to school. What are you doing? Melissa rushed to the car. Where are you taking Ethan? For a moment, Brian couldn't say anything. He stood holding the baby, staring at his wife. In his eyes was a coldness Melissa had never seen. Answer me. Melissa's voice was shaking. Why are there suitcases? Why are you putting the baby in the car? Brian took a deep breath and his expression became resolute, like he'd made a decision. And incredibly, he became defiant. This doesn't concern you. Those words drove a spike of ice through Melissa's heart. Doesn't concern me. Melissa shouted. He's my child. I gave birth to him. He's my child too, Brian said coldly. I have rights as a father. Melissa stared at her husband in disbelief. Was this really the man she'd loved? The person she'd vowed eternal love to at their wedding? The man who'd cried with joy when Chloe was born? Rights? Melissa said in a trembling voice. Sneaking off with the baby, that's a father's right. Brian looked away. I have my reasons. What reasons? Melissa stepped closer. Tell me. What's going on? Why are you doing this? Brian remained silent. In his arms, Ethan made a small sound. That innocent voice cut through the tense air in the garage. Melissa fought back tears and said, "Please, Brian. Talk to me. We're married, aren't we? Whatever the problem is, we can solve it together." But Brian shook his head. "It's too late. I've already decided everything." "Decided what?" I'm taking Ethan with me." "No!" Melissa screamed. "Give him back." Instinctively, she lunged at Brian. A mother's instinct moved her body beyond reason. Melissa tried to snatch Ethan from Brian's arms. "Stop it." Brian backed away, still holding the baby. "It's dangerous. Give him back. Give me back my baby." Melissa was desperate. She grabbed Brian's arm, trying to pull Ethan toward her. Brian resisted, but a mother's strength was stronger than he'd imagined. "Melissa, calm down. The baby's in danger." Those words made Melissa loosen her grip for a moment. And in that gap, she took a different tactic. Feigning calmness, she said in a soft voice, "Brian, please. Give me the baby. Then we can talk calmly. I'll listen to everything that's happening." Brian seemed to hesitate. In his eyes, guilt and determination mixed. And that moment of hesitation proved fatal. Melissa quickly scooped up Ethan. Before Brian could react, she held the baby firmly to her chest and ran from the garage. "Wait! Melissa!" Brian's shout came from behind, but Melissa didn't look back. She flew into the house through the back door and locked it. Brian's pounding on the door immediately followed. "Melissa! Open up. Let's talk. I'm calling the police." Melissa shouted in a trembling voice. "The police? What are you talking about? I'm his father. It's kidnapping. What you were trying to do is kidnapping." The pounding stopped for a moment. Then Brian's voice rumbled low. "Melissa, you'll regret this." The coldness in those words sent chills down Melissa's spine. Still holding the baby, she ran to the living room. She grabbed her cell phone from the sofa and with shaking fingers dialed 911. Melissa desperately explained the situation. Her husband had been trying to put the baby in the car. Suitcases were loaded. He was going to take him somewhere. Melissa gave her address. The operator answered calmly. "We're sending a patrol car. Are you in a safe place now?" "I'm inside the house. I locked the door." "Is your child safe?" Melissa looked down at Ethan. The baby had an anxious expression, perhaps sensing his mother's violent heartbeat. "But he was safe." "He's safe. Where is your husband now?" Melissa listened carefully. The pounding had stopped. Cautiously, she opened the curtain slightly and peered outside. The garage door was still open. And Brian's car was still there. He seemed to be sitting inside the car. "He's in the car," Melissa answered. "Understood. The patrol car will arrive in a few minutes. Don't open the door until then." "Okay." After hanging up, Melissa collapsed onto the sofa. Holding Ethan to her chest, she was trembling. She couldn't believe it. Her husband had been trying to take her baby away. Why? How could he? Outside the window, she heard a car door open. Melissa held her breath. But Brian didn't come toward the house. He stood beside the car, holding his head in his hands. That figure from behind was the husband she knew, but also a complete stranger. From the distance, the sound of a siren approached. It grew louder and finally stopped in front of the house. Blue and red lights lit up the windows. Melissa let out a sigh of relief. 15 minutes after the patrol car arrived, Melissa finally opened the front door. 2 police officers stood there. "Mrs. Carter. Are you all right?" the female officer asked gently. Melissa nodded, but tears began flowing. Still holding Ethan, she was trembling. "Is your child safe?" "Yes, he's safe," Melissa barely managed to answer. The male officer said, "Your husband is in the garage. A colleague is talking to him now. Can you explain the situation to us?" Melissa led the officers into the living room and sat on the sofa. In a shaking voice, she described what she'd witnessed in the garage. The suitcases, the child's seat, and Brian trying to put Ethan in the car. The female officer took notes as she listened. "Did you ask your husband where he was planning to go?" "No. He wouldn't say anything. He just said, 'It doesn't concern you,' and..." Melissa's voice broke. "I understand. Please wait a moment." The female officer went outside to communicate with her colleague in the garage. Meanwhile, Melissa remained in the living room with the male officer. Ethan was beginning to fall asleep in his mother's arms. Even amid all this chaos, the baby seemed comfortable in his mother's embrace. "How many children do you have?" the male officer asked gently. "2. I also have a 5-year-old daughter. She's waiting in the car right now." Melissa gasped. "Chloe. I forgot about her. Your daughter's in the car." "Yes, I was taking her to school. But my daughter," she noticed. "Noticed what?" Melissa explained what Chloe had told her. The phone call last night, the words, "Today's the chance," and the apology, "I'm sorry." The officer took notes with a serious expression. "So your 5-year-old daughter noticed something was wrong with her father?" "Yes. If Chloe hadn't told me..." Melissa shuddered just imagining it. "I would have been driving to school not knowing anything. And during that time, Brian would have taken Ethan." The female officer returned. Her expression was stern. "Mrs. Carter, your husband wants to talk. But only with us present. Are you okay with that?" Melissa took a deep breath. "Yes. I want to know the truth." The officers brought Brian from the garage. Brian looked haggard and couldn't look at Melissa. He sat in a living room chair and covered his face with both hands. "Brian Carter," the male officer said in a stern voice. "Explain what you were planning to do." After a long silence, Brian slowly raised his face. His eyes were red and swollen. "I was going to another state." Melissa gasped. "Another state? Where? Why?" Brian couldn't look at his wife. "Pennsylvania. Philadelphia. Philadelphia." Melissa was confused. "You don't know anyone in Philadelphia?" Brian remained silent. The female officer said, "Mr. Carter, we checked your car. We also looked inside your suitcases. Baby clothes, diapers, formula, looks like you were preparing for a long stay." Brian nodded. "And we checked your cell phone as well," the officer continued. "We found frequent message exchanges with a certain woman." Melissa's heart stopped. "A woman?" Brian covered his face. His shoulders were shaking. "Who is it, Brian?" Melissa's voice was ice cold. "Who were you messaging?" "Her name is Rebecca," the female officer answered. "A woman living in Philadelphia. From the message content, it's clear your husband has had an intimate relationship with her." Melissa stood up. Tears overflowed and her voice shook. Since when, Brian?" Brian finally looked at his wife. His eyes were filled with guilt and anguish. 6 months ago." 6 months. Melissa screamed. "Since I was pregnant with Ethan." Brian couldn't say anything. That silence told the whole story. Melissa's knees gave way and she collapsed onto the sofa. Why didn't you tell me? If you wanted a divorce, you should have just said so. Brian choked on his words. I wanted to be with her. But if there was a custody battle, I thought I'd be at a disadvantage. Melissa stared at her husband in disbelief. So you were going to run away with the baby? I wanted to remarry her and start a new family. But without a child. Brian's voice was shaking. I'm a father. Ethan is my son. What about Chloe? Melissa asked coldly. What were you going to do about your daughter? Brian looked away. Chloe, she's older now, so I thought you could raise her. The moment she heard those words, something inside Melissa broke. Anger welled up. She stood and shouted at Brian. You're despicable. You were going to leave your daughter behind? Do you have any idea how much Chloe loves you? Melissa. Shut up. Tears streamed from Melissa's eyes. You're not a father. A father doesn't abandon his children. A father doesn't betray his wife. You're. She couldn't continue. Melissa broke down crying. The female officer placed a hand on her shoulder. The male officer said to Brian Carter, you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping of a minor. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used as evidence in court. Wait. Brian stood up. I'm his father. I was just trying to take my own child. Even if you're a custodial parent, the officer answered calmly, taking a child without the other custodial parent's consent is kidnapping. Especially with plans to cross state lines, it's also a federal offense. Brian turned pale. The officer took out handcuffs. Put out your hands. Brian looked at Melissa one last time. His eyes were filled with regret. But it was too late. The handcuffs clicked shut, and he was led toward the door by the officers. The sound of the door closing. The house fell silent. Melissa held Ethan and continued crying on the sofa. The husband she'd trusted had been having an affair for 6 months. And he'd tried to take her son away. She wished it were all a dream. Outside the window, the patrol car engine started. The red and blue lights faded, and silence returned. In the empty house, Melissa just kept holding her baby. Brian's trial took place 3 months later. The evidence was clear. Attempted kidnapping with premeditation, infidelity, and betrayal of his family. The lawyer argued for a father's rights, but the prosecution presented the messages between Brian and Rebecca found on his phone. They contained detailed plans to escape with Ethan. The verdict was guilty. 2 years with probation, but custody went entirely to Melissa. The court also severely restricted Brian's visitation rights. Once a month, only with a supervisor present, was he allowed to see the children. But Melissa had already decided. I'll never let him see the children again. The divorce settlement proceeded quickly. Brian had lost the will to resist. The house, the assets, Melissa received everything. Not because she wanted it. She just needed it for the children's future. Brian ended up with Rebecca. But that relationship didn't last long. Rebecca learned the reality. Brian had a criminal record. He'd lost his job, his income was unstable. And above all, he thought only about the family he'd lost. I don't want a man with kids. You're always looking at the past. Rebecca said that and left. Brian was alone. In a small apartment, he stared at photos of Chloe and Ethan every night. He was finally beginning to understand what he'd lost. What was I doing? But it was too late. Melissa and the children would never come back. 6 months later, Melissa moved with Chloe and Ethan to a new apartment. It was in a quiet suburban area, close to a park, with a good school. Not as spacious as the house, but plenty of room for the three of them. Melissa continued her freelance work while raising her two children. It wasn't easy. Doing everything alone was harder than she'd imagined. But she'd grown stronger. That day in the garage when she confronted Brian, something inside her had changed. One evening, before bed, Chloe asked, "Mommy, are you okay?" Melissa smiled as she stroked her daughter's hair. "Yes, I'm okay. Mommy always looks tired." "I suppose so. But I can keep going because I have you too." Chloe hugged her mother. "I'm glad I told you about Daddy that time." Melissa hugged her daughter tightly back. Tears came. "Thank you, Chloe. If you hadn't noticed, Ethan might not be here with us now. I wanted to protect the baby. And I wanted to protect you too, Mommy. You're so brave. Only 5 years old, but so strong." Chloe smiled proudly. "The three of us will do our best together, right?" Melissa looked at her daughter's face. In her eyes was a strength and kindness beyond her years. The events of that day had changed Chloe too. She was no longer just an innocent child. She was a brave girl who'd protected her family. In the next room, Ethan slept peacefully. He still didn't know anything. That his father had tried to take him away, that his mother and sister had protected him. But someday when he grew up, Melissa would tell him everything. He had a right to know the truth. Melissa looked out the window. Stars shone in the night sky. The same starry sky she used to gaze at with Brian. But now it was different. This starry sky belonged only to her and her children. "Family, it's not about numbers," Melissa whispered quietly. "It's about loving and protecting each other. That's what real family is." Chloe nodded slightly at her mother's words. And the two of them stayed close together, waiting for a new morning. The difficult road would continue. But Melissa was certain. The three of them could overcome any hardship. Because they were a real family. Not bound by blood, but by love and trust, a genuine family.